The USMCA, or the new NAFTA free trade agreement, was officially signed in Mexico City. To talk more about it, it's one of our political reporters, Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, what does this signing mean for Canada?
If I were to sum it up in one word, I would say certainty, because since Donald Trump's election, there's been uncertainty. Since the election of Obrador, the Mexican president, he's not a big fan of trade deals. He's a left-wing populist. Trump is a right-wing populist. They both dislike the deal, but they both agreed to sign onto it for the sake of their countries. And for Canada, this deal means certainty, something we've been in short supply of. Now, for, let's say, Alberta's biggest industry, the oil and gas sector, that doesn't help a whole lot. But for the manufacturing sector across the country, we mostly think of manufacturing as being Ontario and Quebec. And yes, there's an awful lot of it centered there, but it's about a little more than 8% of Alberta's economy. It's important straight across the country because we manufacture goods here, we ship them to the United States, they're our number one customer, and we want to make sure that we have access to that market. That's what signing this deal means. I'll tell you what, it was signed on Tuesday around noon Eastern time. I was at the gym Tuesday morning, and I started to see tweets, people going on media outlets in the United States saying Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, was going to pull support for the NAFTA deal to try and use it as a wedge issue, to try and use it against President Donald Trump in the impeachment proceedings. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Both Republicans and Democrats have come to accept this deal. There was an awful lot in it that the Democrats should like, so they've backed it. It's got almost universal support in Canada. Yes, I'm one of the people that thinks we could have gotten a better deal, but this is better than no deal. Let's put it that way.
Brian, it's a Christmas miracle. Let's just leave it at that. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney was in Ottawa with several of his ministers. Bottom line, Brian, is that Kenney wants more money that would impact our bottom line, an equalization rebate, so to speak.
Yeah, Jason Kenney, the premier, came to Ontario. He went to Ottawa. He was here a week ago. I feel like I just saw him. He was with the other premiers calling for a bump in the fiscal stabilization program for Alberta and Saskatchewan, as well as Newfoundland and Labrador. Well, this past few days, he's been in Ottawa along with 8 senior ministers, plying their case, trying to put it to the Trudeau Liberals that, look, we've got a problem. You've had the ag minister meeting with his counterpart. You've had the energy minister meeting with her counterpart. Finance minister meeting with their counterpart. All of those things happening. And of course, the big meeting was the premier meeting with the prime minister. That happened late in the afternoon, Ottawa time, on Tuesday. Jason Kenney came out. I wouldn't say he was optimistic, but he did say that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau listened, agreed with certain points. I guess they disagreed on others. Cautiously optimistic might be a stretch to put it, but Jason Kenney wasn't coming out of the meeting, spitting nails every time Justin Trudeau's name was mentioned. They're looking for about an extra $2.4 billion, I think it is. I don't think they're going to get that full amount, but he's got to make the case for it if he hopes to get anything. So look for a bit of money to come out of the fiscal stabilization program for Alberta, and look for something of what they're now calling an equalization rebate. They won't completely change the program, but they'll say, hey, we understand you're going through some tough times. Here's a bit of cash. Will that make you happy?
So instead of the $2.4 billion, maybe $2 billion, $1.5 billion? What are you hearing?
At this point, we don't know. It's too early to tell. We will perhaps get a bit more information when we get a fiscal update, when we see the budget. These things will come out. But the Prime Minister continuing to meet. I would say that Premier Kenney's meeting went better than Premier Moe's meeting from Saskatchewan, who came out saying he was completely unhappy, but not as well as Ontario Premier Doug Ford's meeting, who came out saying, look, we're going to work together and the election's behind us. So Premier Kenney somewhere in the middle of those two.
The jobs numbers came in, Brian, and they were lower than expected. In fact, they were some of the biggest job losses in quite some time. Do we know why?
A loss of 71,000 jobs, and still trying to sort out why that happened, because the consensus of economists surveyed by Reuters was for a gain of 10,000, which isn't a big gain, but a drop of 71,000 is the biggest drop in several years. You compare that to the Americans who added almost a quarter million jobs in the same time period. We both released our numbers last Friday, and it's a stark contrast. So this isn't good. Numbers were up in Ontario, they were down in Alberta, but a mishmash across the country. And this has an awful lot of people saying, "Look, Justin Trudeau's economic policies aren't working." Again, we'll see what they come up with in the fiscal update. We're expecting that shortly from the federal government, and see if they are able to shed a bit more light on what they're going to do to try and turn this around. Are we headed in the wrong direction? I'll tell you, there are some indicators that we could be.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was looking for details in the recent throne speech about the Liberals' pledge of a dental care plan and whether the government will actually go ahead with it.
Yeah, and all they said was that it was a possibility. I was very disappointed in the throne speech, Hal. I'll tell you that. This is a government that has the lowest percentage of the popular vote of any government ever elected in Canadian history. They lost the popular vote. They were shut out of regions of this country. They've got limited support in other regions, and you would expect them to maybe in a minority parliament say, okay, let's reach across the aisle and bring in ideas from other parties. Instead, they paid lip service to them. They didn't commit to them. They mentioned the NDP's dental care program. They mentioned the idea of the Conservative proposal to make parental leave tax-free, but no commitment on either side. And the rest of the throne speech was very much a lean into it, go forward with the Liberal plan, including things like a ban on many very popular semi-automatic rifles that are used in hunting and sport shooting, all kinds of issues like that. So it was a bit of a strange one. If I were Jagmeet Singh, I wouldn't be holding out hope for that. If I were Justin Trudeau and I wanted an easy win on an issue like pharmacare, I would offer the premiers a bit of money to help boost the programs that already exist. As you and I talked last week, Alberta has a very good program. Manitoba has a good program. Quebec's is excellent. Ontario's is so-so. Give the premiers a bit of money and say, let me help you bolster your program so that everyone's covered, and go from there. We don't need to recreate a big national program on pharmacare, and we don't need the government deciding when I can and can't see my dentist.
It has been over a year now since the two Canadian Michaels, Spavor and Kovrig, were arrested and illegally held in China. Brian, there's news that the two men may face national security trials in China, and you say hope for their release is fading?
In my view, it's fading, and everyone has their own opinion on this, but there were three things that happened last week that made me say, I don't have a lot of hope. One was the hot mic incident where Justin Trudeau was caught essentially laughing at U.S. President Donald Trump behind his back, along with French President Emmanuel Macron, Boris Johnson, the U.K. Prime Minister, at a NATO summit. Now, how does this affect the two Michaels being held in China? China's not part of NATO. It has nothing to do with that. Well, yes and no. One of our best hopes was for the Trudeau government to say to Donald Trump, look, we're in this mess, and two Canadians are being held unlawfully because of this simple reason. We honored our commitment to you. We need you to lean on China to release these two men, or who knows what will happen to Meng Wanzhou. That didn't happen, and now it can't happen because the Trump administration is extremely upset with Justin Trudeau. They were making fun of the jobs numbers that we were talking about a moment ago, mocking Justin Trudeau on Twitter about that. The clip of Trudeau making this has been turned into an attack ad by Joe Biden. It was spoofed on Saturday Night Live. So there's no hope of the Trump administration helping us on this. The other thing that came about was a speech in Montreal by China's new ambassador to Canada that included comments from that ambassador that made me say there is no hope of movement from China. And then thirdly, comments coming out of Huawei Canada that made me say the company itself is not going to press pressure for their release. They see the detention of Meng Wanzhou, their chief financial officer, as a political act, but they don't see the same for the two Michaels.
Our privacy watchdog says Stats Canada collecting our bank data was legal, but wrong, Brian. Tell me more about that.
Well, what they said was that Stats Canada had the legal authority to do this, but that they should have done it in a different way. I actually don't think they should have the legal authority to do it. I don't think that that's a proper reading of the law. And if it is, I think the law should be changed. If you remember back to the controversy, Stats Canada decided that they were going to go to your bank and mine, and they were going to ask for, I believe it was 500,000 Canadians' financial data at a time. And so, over the course of a couple of years, we'd be talking about millions of Canadians. And what they wanted was every single detail: your name, your address, your phone numbers, your social insurance number, and then every single credit and debit to your account. All right, Hal, where are you spending your money? Oh, you're spending an awful lot of money at that store there. What is that saying about Hal? Stats Canada would say, well, we're just connecting it or collecting it in an anonymized fashion. We won't know where Hal spent his money, but the fact is, it could have been compromised. People could have looked at that. And the privacy watchdog is saying there are problems with both how Stats Canada went about doing this and what they planned on doing it. So, a number of calls to change and a call to halt this program until these changes are implemented. I just think the whole program should be halted, period. You don't need to know every single transaction that I make with my bank in order to plan social programs, which is what the government said they needed the information for.
Last Friday marked the 30th anniversary of the École Polytechnique massacre in Montreal, Brian. The Liberals used the occasion to start pushing some more gun control, and you say this could be a wrong path that the Liberals are going down.
It's completely the wrong path because what they're offering up is that, well, after 30 years, they're going to ban the rifle that was used in it. And that's called a Ruger Mini 14. It's a 22 caliber rifle that is commonly used in hunting. All this talk of military style assault weapons, and these are weapons that were built for the battlefield, that does not apply to this rifle. And it's been 30 years. It was used in that massacre. That was a horrible event. But to turn around and say that we've got to ban it, well, we may as well ban white vans because someone rented a white van and drove it down Yonge Street and killed almost as many people. That kind of thinking doesn't help. We do have a gun violence problem in this country, which is what the Liberals claim their gun ban will solve. But how? I'm sitting a few blocks from one of the weekend shootings in Toronto. It was right at Queen and Spadina. It wasn't out in a bad neighborhood. It wasn't in an area known to be populated by gangs or the mafia or bikers. It was not far from the entertainment district where people go and spend their weekends. So that's a real problem. Those shootings are committed by people using illegal, smuggled handguns. They are not committed by people using rifles. And what's the government planning to do? They're planning to spend $600 million to buy back rifles after they ban them. And with government programs, if they say 600 million, it'll be over $1 billion. Compare that to what they're willing to spend over 5 years on guns and gangs, giving money to the provinces and municipalities to deal with this issue. 214 million over the same time period. 214 million over 5 years to deal with the actual problem, and 600 million to $1 billion to buy back guns that aren't being used in crimes. It makes zero sense. But I guess the Liberals figure it's good politics, and spending $1 billion of your money to help them in their politics must be a good bargain for them.
What are the Liberals saying when it comes to actual control of some of the crime which is happening in our country right now, instead of the gun control itself? Are they going after the crime, after the perpetrators?
There was a big summit a little over a year ago, that almost 2 years ago now, that I was hopeful for. Ralph Goodale, who was then still an elected Liberal MP and public safety minister, at that point said, well, we're not going after guns. We're not doing that, and we're trying to look at for this. And that's where this $214 million came from. There was also money to give to the Canada Border Service Agency and to the RCMP, as well as some other programs. And in total, about $300 million across the whole country and across a variety of issues to try and deal with the guns and the gangs and the actual problem. But again, that's over 5 years. The money hasn't flowed. I can tell you that I was at an announcement here in Ontario months and months ago where they announced 54 million from the federal government. The province will get it in 2020. They don't have it yet. The problem's happening now. They're promising money next year and for years after, So I don't get it. They're completely focused on the wrong target.
Yeah, they absolutely need the money right now to go after the gangs and the crime. Absolutely. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, joining me once again via Skype from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.